On October 28, 2025, at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning, Monroe Police Department dispatch received a call that would shake this Louisiana city to its core. Officers arrived at an apartment complex on Cypress Street to find a scene of unimaginable violence. 2 men lay dead inside the residence. A 2-year-old child, clinging to life, would be rushed to the hospital where she would be pronounced deceased. 3 lives extinguished in a single night. Within hours, 19-year-old Travis Payton would be taken into custody. The suspect and one of the victims knew each other. For days earlier, they had been involved in a confrontation at a high school homecoming game. What happened in those 4 days? What transforms a public altercation into a massacre that claims 3 innocent lives, including a toddler barely old enough to speak? This case forces us to examine the razor-thin line between conflict and catastrophe, between anger and annihilation. Monroe, a city of roughly 50,000 residents in northeastern Louisiana, would find itself grappling with questions that have no easy answers. How does retaliation escalate to this level of brutality? When does the instinct to strike back override every human impulse toward mercy? The story that unfolds reveals the devastating consequences when violence becomes the chosen response to perceived disrespect. Before we examine the darkness of that October night, we need to understand who was lost. Simpson was a father, a friend, a man embedded in his community. Those who knew him described someone who showed up for the people he loved. He worked hard, provided for his family, and maintained the kind of steady presence that forms the backbone of any neighborhood. Simpson had a child who looked up to him, relied on him, trusted that he would always be there to protect her. Living with Simpson was his lifelong friend, Bosley. Their friendship stretched back years, the kind of bond formed through shared experiences and mutual loyalty. Bosley had his own story, his own struggles and triumphs. He found stability in his friendship with Simpson, a place where he belonged. Friends remembered him as someone who would help out when needed, who contributed to the household, who valued the brotherhood he had found. Then there was Jhersi, the youngest victim. At just 2 years old, she was beginning to develop her personality, learning new words, discovering the world around her. She had her whole life ahead of her, years of birthdays and holidays, first days of school, graduations, all the milestones that define a human life. She was cherished by her family, protected by the adults around her. Her laughter filled the apartment. Her presence brought joy. These 3 people, connected by family and friendship, shared their lives under one roof. The apartment on Cypress Street represented safety, a place to rest after long days, a space where they could be themselves. They had no reason to believe that October 28 would be anything other than another ordinary night. Monroe sits in Ouachita Parish, a region shaped by the Ouachita River and a history that stretches back generations. The city has seen its share of economic challenges and social changes, but like many American cities its size, it maintains a strong sense of community. Neighbors know neighbors. Families put down roots. People take pride in their local schools, their churches, their connections to one another. The apartment complex where Simpson, Bosley, and Jhersi lived was one of many residential areas throughout Monroe. Working families called it home. Children played outside when weather permitted. Residents came and went with the rhythms of daily life, heading to jobs, running errands, returning home to rest. The complex was neither the wealthiest nor the poorest part of town. It was simply where people lived their lives. This ordinariness matters. Violence of this magnitude rarely announces itself in advance. There are no warning signs posted on street corners. The apartment building where this tragedy unfolded looked like any other. The families living there were pursuing the same dreams and facing the same challenges as families anywhere. They wanted safety for their children. They wanted stability. They wanted tomorrow to come without catastrophe. When violent crime shatters that normalcy, it sends shockwaves through the entire community. Parents hold their children closer. Neighbors eye their surroundings with new suspicion. The sense of security that allows people to sleep peacefully at night evaporates. Monroe would have to confront this loss of innocence, this brutal reminder that tragedy can strike anywhere, can steal anyone. Travis Payton was 19 years old when he was arrested for this triple homicide. His name was already familiar to law enforcement. His criminal history included prior arrests and convictions. He had served time behind bars before. At the time of the murders, he was on probation, supposedly under supervision designed to keep him on a lawful path and prevent exactly this kind of violence. Understanding Payton's background requires looking at patterns of behavior. Someone with multiple arrests by age 19 has typically demonstrated an escalating disregard for legal and social boundaries. Each arrest represents a moment where choice and consequence intersected. Each conviction offered an opportunity for reflection and change. The probation status indicates that the system had given him chances to redirect his life. But criminal history alone does not explain what happened on October 28. Plenty of people have troubled pasts without committing mass murder. Plenty of individuals on probation manage to stay out of trouble. Something specific had to catalyze this level of violence. Something had to transform Payton from a petty criminal with a record into someone willing to break into a home and open fire on 3 people, including a toddler. The answer, investigators would discover, lay in events that had transpired just 4 days earlier. Richwood High School was hosting its homecoming celebration on October 24, 2025. Homecoming represents one of those quintessential American traditions, a night when students, alumni, and families gather to celebrate school spirit. Football games, reunions, teenagers dressed up for dances. It should have been a night of joy and community pride. Simpson attended the homecoming festivities with his family, including his child. At some point during the evening, an altercation broke out. The details of what sparked the initial confrontation remain somewhat unclear, but what is known is that Simpson's child became involved in some kind of dispute. As any parent would, Simpson stepped in to protect his child. The confrontation escalated. Words were exchanged. Tempers flared. Simpson, defending his family, physically intervened. Travis Payton was on the receiving end of that intervention. In front of peers and community members, Payton found himself in a physical altercation that he lost. He was embarrassed, humiliated in a very public setting. For many people, such an incident would be embarrassing but ultimately forgettable. Tempers cool. People move on. Perhaps there would be lingering awkwardness if the parties encountered each other again, but life would continue. The homecoming game would fade into memory, replaced by the 1,000 other concerns that fill daily existence. But for Travis Payton, the October 24 altercation festered. The humiliation burned. The need to restore his reputation, to respond to what he perceived as an unforgivable slight, consumed his thinking. In his mind, Simpson had disrespected him, had made him look weak in front of others. That could not stand. That demanded a response. This is where the psychology of retaliation becomes crucial to understanding what followed. Payton apparently could not let the incident go. Rather than accepting the outcome and moving forward, he dwelled on it. Rather than recognizing that Simpson had simply been protecting his child, Payton framed the altercation as a personal attack that required vengeance. Friends and family of the victims would later recall conversations in the days between October 24 and October 28. There was concern that Payton might try to retaliate. Simpson and those close to him were aware that the homecoming confrontation had created tension. They knew Payton had a criminal history. They understood that he might not simply let things go. But even with those concerns, no one could have imagined the scale of violence that was being planned. No one anticipated that Payton's response would involve breaking into their home in the middle of the night and opening fire. The gap between expecting possible retaliation and the reality of what occurred is vast. The early morning hours of October 28, 2025, were quiet in Monroe. Most residents were asleep in their homes, oblivious to the violence about to unfold on Cypress Street. At approximately 2:56 a.m., something shattered that silence. The exact sequence of events inside the apartment remains under investigation, but the evidence tells a horrifying story. Someone forced their way into the residence. The door showed clear signs of forced entry, indicating that the intruder had to break through locks and barriers to gain access. This was not someone who had been invited. This was not a guest who knocked and was admitted. This was a violent intrusion into a private home where 3 people were likely sleeping or at least unprepared for an attack. Once inside, the assailant opened fire. Investigators would later determine that 2 different caliber weapons were used. The gunfire echoed through the apartment complex, finally prompting someone to call 911. By the time that call reached dispatch and officers were dispatched to the scene, the shooter had fled. When police arrived at the apartment, they encountered a scene of chaos and death. 2 adult males, Simpson and Bosley, were found deceased inside the residence. They had been shot multiple times. The violence of the attack was evident in the crime scene itself. This had not been a single shot fired in the heat of an argument. This was sustained gunfire aimed at killing. But the horror did not end with the 2 adult victims. The 2-year-old Jhersi had also been shot. First responders immediately recognized that she needed emergency medical care. She was rushed to the hospital, where medical staff fought to save her life. Despite their best efforts, Jhersi succumbed to her injuries and was pronounced dead. The presence of a 2-year-old victim transforms this case from a tragic double homicide into something even more incomprehensible. Jhersi posed no threat to anyone. She could not have been involved in the October 24 altercation. She had nothing to do with whatever grievances Payton held against Simpson. She was simply in the apartment because that was her home, where she lived and slept and played. Yet the shooter fired anyway. Whether Jhersi was deliberately targeted or was simply hit by gunfire sprayed throughout the apartment, the result is the same. A toddler was killed in an act of violence that defies moral comprehension. Monroe Police Department investigators immediately began working to identify the perpetrator. The early morning timing of the crime meant that few witnesses had seen anything useful. The shooter had fled the scene before police arrival. But modern investigative techniques provided crucial leads quickly. Digital evidence became a key factor. Investigators examined cell phone data for potential suspects. They discovered a telling pattern associated with Travis Payton's phone. Shortly before the murders, his phone had been powered off. It remained off during the time period when the crime occurred. Then, after the murders, the phone was powered back on. This pattern is significant. People typically keep their phones on throughout the night, either because they use them as alarms or simply because there is no reason to power them off. Deliberately shutting off a phone in the middle of the night, during the exact window when a crime occurs, and then powering it back on afterward suggests consciousness of guilt. It suggests an awareness that phone location data could place someone at a crime scene. Location data from the periods when the phone was on further implicated Payton. The digital trail placed him in the vicinity of the crime scene before and after the murders. Combined with the motive established by the October 24 altercation, investigators had enough probable cause to obtain an arrest warrant. Within hours of the murders, Travis Payton was taken into custody. The speed of his arrest speaks to the strength of the evidence pointing in his direction. Police did not need days or weeks to identify their primary suspect. The combination of motive, opportunity, and digital evidence quickly coalesced into a case against Payton. Crime scene investigators meticulously documented the apartment. The forced entry point showed where the intruder had gained access. The location of shell casings indicated where the shooter had stood. Blood spatter patterns helped reconstruct the sequence of events. Every detail mattered, every piece of physical evidence another fact to support the eventual prosecution. The ballistics evidence proved particularly important. 2 different calibers of ammunition were recovered from the scene. This immediately raised questions about whether Payton had acted alone or whether there had been multiple shooters. Did Payton bring 2 weapons? Did an accomplice participate in the attack? These questions remain central to the ongoing investigation. The condition of the apartment also told a story. The residence had been ransacked. Belongings were strewn about, drawers emptied, possessions disturbed. Among the items missing was a PlayStation 5 gaming console. The theft of property suggests that robbery may have been part of the motive, though it seems more likely that the ransacking occurred after the murders, possibly as an attempt to obscure the primary motive of retaliation. The presence of robbery elements complicates the narrative but does not fundamentally change it. Even if Payton decided to steal items while he was committing murder, the evidence strongly suggests that retaliation for the October 24 altercation was the primary driving force. The theft was opportunistic rather than the main objective. News of the triple homicide spread quickly through Monroe. Social media posts shared details before official statements were released. Friends and family members posted tributes to the victims. Community members expressed shock, horror, and grief. Vigils were organized. Candles were lit. Flowers were placed at the apartment complex. People gathered to mourn collectively, to support one another, to try to make sense of the senseless. The victims' families faced the impossible task of planning funerals for their loved ones, of saying goodbye to people who should have had decades of life still ahead of them. For Simpson's children, the loss was incomprehensible. They had lost their father, murdered in his own home. For Jhersi's family, the grief was compounded by her age and innocence. A 2-year-old should be starting preschool someday, not being buried. The emotional toll on the surviving family members cannot be overstated. The broader Monroe community struggled with feelings of vulnerability and anger. If this could happen on Cypress Street, it could happen anywhere. If a public altercation at a high school homecoming could escalate to mass murder within 4 days, what did that say about the safety of the community? Parents worried about their own children attending school events. Neighbors looked at one another with new suspicion. Local officials and community leaders called for calm and justice. They emphasized that violence would not be tolerated, that law enforcement would pursue every lead, that the perpetrator would face the full consequences of the law. But words, however well-intentioned, provide limited comfort when 3 people have been murdered. Understanding why Travis Payton allegedly committed this crime requires examining the psychology of retaliation and masculine honor. The October 24 altercation was public. Payton was physically bested by Simpson in front of peers and community members. For someone whose self-image is built around toughness and respect, such a public loss of face can be psychologically devastating. In certain social contexts, perceived disrespect demands a response. Failure to respond is seen as weakness, as confirmation that the disrespect was justified. This creates a cycle where violence begets violence, where each slight must be answered with an even greater show of force. The logic is profoundly destructive, but it is also deeply ingrained in certain subcultures. Payton apparently could not accept the outcome of the October 24 confrontation. Rather than recognizing that Simpson had simply been protecting his child, Payton interpreted the event through the lens of personal disrespect. He felt he had to respond, had to restore his reputation, had to prove that he could not be treated that way without consequences. But why did the response have to be murder? Why not another physical confrontation? Why not a targeted attack on Simpson alone? The answers to these questions reveal the depths of Payton's alleged rage and the complete absence of moral boundaries. Breaking into someone's home in the middle of the night escalates the violence beyond any reasonable retaliation. Using firearms rather than fists transforms the confrontation from a physical altercation into an execution. Killing Simpson's friend Bosley, who apparently had nothing to do with the October 24 incident, shows a disregard for innocent life. And shooting a 2-year-old child, whether deliberately or recklessly, represents a moral depravity that defies explanation. This was not a fight that got out of hand. This was not a momentary loss of control. This was planned. The forced entry, the weapons, the timing, all suggest premeditation. Payton allegedly decided that the appropriate response to a public altercation was to invade Simpson's home and kill everyone inside. Despite the rapid arrest of Travis Payton, significant questions remain. Did Payton act alone, or did he have accomplices? The presence of two different calibers of ammunition suggests the possibility of a second shooter. If others were involved, who were they? What roles did they play? Are they still at large? What happened to the weapons used in the murders? Were they recovered? Can they be definitively linked to Payton? Ballistics evidence will be crucial in the prosecution, so establishing the chain of custody and proving that Payton possessed or fired the weapons is essential. What was the exact sequence of events inside the apartment? Were the victims awake when Payton entered? Did they have any opportunity to defend themselves or call for help? Understanding the timeline helps establish the level of premeditation and planning involved. Why was Jhersi shot? Was she deliberately targeted, or was she hit by gunfire aimed at others? This question goes to the heart of Payton's moral culpability. If he deliberately shot a 2-year-old child, that reveals a level of depravity that demands the maximum punishment available under law. What about Payton's probation status? He was supposed to be under supervision, supposedly being monitored to prevent exactly this kind of violent behavior. How did the probation system fail so catastrophically? Were there warning signs that were missed? Could anything have been done to prevent this tragedy? These questions will be explored as the case moves through the criminal justice system. Payton faces charges of triple homicide. The legal process will unfold over months or years. Prosecutors will present their evidence. Defense attorneys will challenge that evidence and present their own narrative. A jury will ultimately decide Payton's fate. The October 28 murders have left scars on Monroe that will take years to heal, if they ever fully heal at all. The victims' families must navigate life without their loved ones. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone will be marked by absence. Children are growing up without their father. A family mourns a toddler who will never grow up. The broader community has lost its sense of security. Residents of the Cypress Street apartment complex had to return to their homes knowing that a triple murder had occurred just feet from where they sleep. Children attended school knowing that a dispute at a homecoming game had led to 3 deaths. Parents faced the impossible task of explaining to their children how such violence could occur in their city. Monroe's reputation has been affected. When people search for news about the city, this crime appears prominently. The murders become part of the city's story, part of how Monroe is perceived by outsiders. That is unfair to the vast majority of Monroe residents who are law-abiding, peaceful people simply trying to live their lives. But perception often matters more than reality. The tragedy also highlights broader societal issues around violence, retaliation, and the value of human life. How do we as a society prevent young men like Travis Payton from concluding that murder is an acceptable response to perceived disrespect? How do we break the cycles of violence that claim innocent lives? How do we protect children like Jhersi from becoming collateral damage in conflicts that have nothing to do with them? These are not easy questions. They touch on issues of poverty, education, family structure, criminal justice, and cultural values. There are no simple solutions. But every tragedy like this one should prompt reflection and discussion about how to prevent the next one. Travis Payton now sits in custody, facing charges that could result in life imprisonment or potentially the death penalty, depending on how prosecutors proceed. The legal system will determine his fate through a process designed to balance the rights of the accused with the interests of justice for the victims. For the victims' families, no legal outcome can bring back their loved ones. No jury verdict can restore Simpson, Bosley, and Jhersi to life. No sentence can undo the trauma and grief that this crime has caused. Justice, in cases like this, is imperfect at best. But accountability matters. Society must demonstrate that such violence will not be tolerated, that those who commit murder will face consequences. The prosecution of Travis Payton serves both practical and symbolic functions. Practically, it removes a dangerous individual from society. Symbolically, it affirms that human life has value and that those who take life unlawfully will answer for their actions. The victims deserve to be remembered as more than statistics, more than names in a news report. Simpson was a father and a friend who died trying to live his life and protect his family. Bosley was a loyal friend who found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jhersi was a 2-year-old child with her whole life ahead of her. Their deaths were preventable. If Travis Payton had chosen differently, if he had let go of his need for retaliation, if he had valued human life over his wounded pride, they would still be alive. Every decision Payton made after October 24 was a choice. He chose to plan revenge. He chose to obtain weapons. He chose to break into the apartment. He chose to open fire. And 3 people died because of those choices. Monroe must now find a way forward. The community will heal slowly, if at all. Memorials to the victims will stand as reminders of what was lost. Families will work to honor the memories of their loved ones by living their own lives as fully as possible. The criminal justice system will grind on, processing Travis Payton through its procedures. Evidence will be presented. Arguments will be made. Eventually, a resolution will be reached. But that resolution, whatever form it takes, will not erase the events of October 28, 2025. For those of us observing this tragedy from outside Monroe, the case serves as a reminder of how quickly violence can escalate, how devastating the consequences of retaliation can be, and how many innocent lives can be destroyed by one person's refusal to let go of anger. The line between conflict and catastrophe is thinner than we like to imagine. If this story hits close to home, make sure to like, share, and stay informed. The more people understand what happened here, the fewer families will have to face something like this again. 3 lives were taken on October 28. A father, a friend, a child. 3 individuals with their own dreams, their own relationships, their own futures. Travis Payton stands accused of destroying all of that in a fit of rage and revenge. The investigation continues. The legal process proceeds. And Monroe, Louisiana, mourns. The story of this crime raises profound questions about violence, revenge, and the value we place on human life. What happens when personal honor becomes more important than morality? What happens when retaliation becomes the automatic response to conflict? What happens when a young man with a criminal history and access to weapons decides that murder is the appropriate answer to public embarrassment? The answers lie scattered across a crime scene on Cypress Street, in the grief of families who will never be whole again, and in the larger questions that society must grapple with if we hope to prevent future tragedies. Monroe will remember October 28, 2025. The victims will not be forgotten. And perhaps, in remembering, the community can find some way to prevent such senseless violence from claiming more innocent lives. Which story do you want to be covered next? Like, share, and subscribe, and let's keep uncovering the truth, one case at a time.